Yesterday, after 7 years of waiting, we finally brought the dogs into court. Now, I don't mean literally that we brought dogs into court, although that would have been awesome. And there actually was one Beagle who joined us outside of court who had been rescued from in Vigo, a notorious animal testing facility that was shut down by the federal government back in 2022. What I mean is that for the first time, we got a chance to present evidence of animal cruelty from Ridglan Farms in a court of law. In particular, we presented evidence of mass abuse, trauma, neglect, and in some cases, outright mutilation of dogs happening right here in Dane County, Wisconsin. And I want to give you an update on what happened, because if we prevail in court in this case, it'll mean freedom for 3,000 plus dogs, but also set an important precedent that even big corporations cannot get away with violating the law. So the decision may not come down in this case for a few weeks or even months. In the meantime, I just want to share just a few high-level takeaways from the hearing yesterday. First, the hearing, multiple former workers testified about these absolutely gruesome surgical procedures being performed at Ridglan Farms without anesthesia or even veterinary supervision. So Scott Gilbertson testified first, and Scott is an amazing animal rights activist who went undercover at Ridglan Farms in early 2022, so just on his own, and discovered that Ridglan Farms was performing a mutilation, something called cherry eye surgery, without anesthesia. So cherry eye is a condition where the gland of a dog's eye that produces tears becomes inflamed and prolapses, meaning it comes out from the inside. It's normally buried inside behind the eye. Sometimes it pushes out and forms something that looks like a cherry on the edge of the eye. And this is a very important gland. It's important for tear production. The eyes of a dog will become incredibly uncomfortable if they don't have any tear production. But it also makes the eye look really weird. And customers don't want to buy dogs with cherry eye because it's an obvious injury that the dog has and will need to be treated. But instead of properly treating cherry eye with medication, with a careful surgery that will tuck the gland back into the eye, what Scotty testified to yesterday is that Ridglan Farms has non-veterinarians just pull the dog down, take a pair of tweezers and pull the eye gland out, take a pair of scissors and just cut it off at incredible risk to the dog and causing a bloodbath and a pool of blood everywhere as the dog yelps and thrashes in pain. So believe it or not, this is not the only surgical mutilation being performed routinely at Ridglan Farms, because another employee, Matt Reich, who came forward after I was prosecutor for rescuing dogs at Ridglan Farms, testified that Ridglan also performs, without anesthesia and without veterinary supervision, a surgery called debarking or devocalization. And Matt said they would take big batches of dogs, sometimes 30 or 40 at a time. And because they're making too much noise and causing a fuss in the facility, they would inject the dogs or treat the dogs with what's called a paralytic that just paralyzes the dog, but doesn't actually prevent consciousness, a loss of consciousness, or prevention of pain. I can still feel what's happening. And a non-veterinarian would just hold the dog down, reach into the back of their throat, and tear their vocal cords out and just throw the vocal cords quivering on the floor. So both of these practices, cherry eye surgery and debarking, are violations of law in the state of Wisconsin because only veterinarians are allowed to perform surgeries, and for good reason, because a lot can go wrong when you're ripping an organ off a dog's eye or out of the back of their throat. Both of these procedures were also performed without any anesthesia during the procedure or painkillers afterwards. And because these procedures are mutilations, my co-counsel Kristen Schrank argued that they're actually felonies, because when you intentionally mutilate an animal in the state of Wisconsin, and it is not a normal and accepted veterinary practice, and these are not just not normal and accepted veterinary practices. In fact, they're violations of Wisconsin law with respect to the practices of veterinary medicine, then it is a felony. Maybe the most disturbing thing that an employee testified about, however, was some of the things that didn't directly relate to surgery, but related to how animals were being treated routinely given the neglect at the facility. So Matt Reich testified that there would often be fights that break out in the kennel. So most of the dogs are housed 1 to 2 per dog. But the young dogs, after they're weaned, for a brief period of time, would be housed in group housing. So 8 to 10, maybe 12 dogs per kennel, a slightly larger 8x8 cage. But because these dogs often were confined very tightly and improperly socialized, fights would break out. And Matt would come to work and just find dead dogs who'd been, picked on and beaten up and killed by another dog. And this is always a sad, horrible experience for him. And he hated finding these dogs. But one day he arrived at work, found one of these dead dogs, reached over with his hand to pick the dog up, and his hand went into the dog's cavity, his body, went inside the dog. You realized the dog had been ripped open, was missing some ribs and organs, and had been partially cannibalized. So Matt testified that he had a panic attack, collapsed, had to go home for the day, and has no other recollection of what happened that day because he was so traumatized by that experience. But it gets even worse. Matt also testifies that one day when he was asked to dispose of dogs in a bag, because they pick up all these dead dogs, throw them into these big freezer bags, he noticed that there was a puppy moving inside one of the bags. And when he told one of his supervisors, hey, one of these dogs is still alive and she's being suffocated in this freezer bag, and we're about to throw her into a freezer or into a landfill, the supervisor just responded, the dog's not going to make it anyways. As if that's the point. The point is, this is a conscious being who you've just thrown alive into a freezer bag. Not whether the dog's going to survive and make the company a profit, but of course, at places like Ridglan Farms, whether there's a dog in a freezer bag, conscious and still squirming in agony, isn't a priority. So that's the first takeaway, that there are former workers talking about some just reviling or vilesome, sorry, my brain's not working today, vile and horrifying procedures. The second takeaway is that, and this is a good takeaway, that an array of nationally renowned experts expressed horror regarding the practices at Ridglan Farms. So Dr. Mark Bekoff, who's written some of the most well-received books about animal behavior and psychology, he's one of the most famous ethologists, animal behaviorists in the world. He's been lauded as a champion of kind of the animal or the Dog Behavior Institute, has won so many awards, has had best-selling books, and is, I think, written, from what he testified yesterday, 1,000 peer-reviewed papers in his long and illustrious career. He's now emeritus, meaning he's retired from the University of Colorado. He was the first expert to testify, and he testified that having observed thousands and thousands of hours of dog behavior, including dogs in all forms of neglect, starvation, mistreatment, you name it, he's seen it. Mark Bekoff has never seen anything as bad as Ridglan Farms. Dogs spinning in cages for not seconds, not minutes, but hours at a time. Dogs in cages so small that when there's negative stimuli, something that scares them, a smell that's bad, something that causes them pain, like searing pain on their foot because they're walking on wire, they cannot escape the negative stimuli, the aversive stimuli. And it's caused trauma and stress that is beyond the pale, beyond anything this famous dog behaviorist who's observed dogs for his entire career had ever seen. But Mark was just the first of many experts who testified about the disturbing conditions at Ridglan Farms. And there was another animal behaviorist named Dr. Patricia McConnell, who's actually very famous in Wisconsin, who described the conditions at Ridglan Farms as tortuous. Because when you confine a dog, who is a highly social animal, in a solitary metal 2x4 cage for their entire life, that is a form of psychological torture. It causes the animals to go psychotic. And we went from Dr. Bekoff to Dr. McConnell to Dr. Wickman, a local veterinarian, who described the conditions as disturbing, and Dr. Schussen Rosenberg, who made what I thought was a very important point. It was a point that I talked to her and asked for her opinion on, namely that Ridglan Farms had conditions that were worse than in Vigo, another infamous animal testing and breeding facility that was actually shut down by the federal government in 2022. So if Ridglan Farms is even worse than in Vigo, there is no excuse for not enforcing the animal cruelty laws against them. And if in Vigo needs to be shut down, Ridglan needs to be shut down as well. Because unlike in Vigo, Ridglan forces animals to live in solitary confinement. forces to live animals for animals to live their entire lives indoors in 2x4 metal cages. These are things that didn't happen in Vigo. And if in Vigo was too cruel to be legal, then Ridglan is too. So third takeaway that came out yesterday. The state and federal government have known about all these abuses for nearly 20 years and done absolutely nothing to protect the dogs. So I'll just go through a series of documents. I'll reference a series of documents showing the federal and state governments knew about animal abuse, but prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's Office and the District Attorney's Office in Wisconsin repeatedly have declined to enforce animal cruelty laws. First evidence comes from 2006 when the USDA received a whistleblower complaint suggesting there were dangerous and unsanitary conditions that involved accumulation of feces, the smell of burning piles of animals. Apparently, there were hundreds of dogs being disposed of and just burned in huge piles. The USDA apparently found these reports credible and yet did absolutely nothing about it. Fast forward 10 years to October 2016. State inspectors found that there are animals whose feet, because they were standing on wire with gauges or holes in the wire that were too large, that were literally falling through the holes, and it was causing foot injuries. There were animals with noticeable difficulty standing or moving. This is a direct quote from the report. Animals with foot health issues, also a direct quote. And a number of dogs in the facility were displaying stereotypical behaviors, such as circling, pacing, and wall bouncing. The report indicates that efforts must be taken to address the dog's abnormal behaviors because such behaviors aren't indicative of a dog's welfare, and in fact, are an indicator that there's been a violation of law. Move on to February of 2017. The USDA once again finds there are animals with foot health problems in February of 2017. Move on to July of 2022. Again, a state inspection report finds that there's enclosures with rusted wire flooring. 30% of the enclosures, in fact, have rusted wire flooring that will cause injuries to the dog's feet if not fixed. That same report finds that the feces and waste buildup is so bad that it's causing nausea among the inspectors. The inspectors, for hours after leaving the facility, felt irritation in their mouth and throat. And then in December 2023, another federal inspection report indicating that there are flooring issues. Dogs whose feet and legs are falling through the wire floor, getting caught in the wire floor. And interestingly, in that report, Ridglan claims there had been no foot health issues, even though in recent years there had been multiple foot health issues. And then finally, in June of 2024, even as our prosecution, my prosecution of rescuing dogs, has put Ridglan in the spotlight, even after we filed a criminal complaint against Ridglan, alleging that their crimes being committed and a special prosecutor must be appointed, Ridglan is still experiencing issues like a dog, quote, limping and keeping weight off her right front paw, which appears to be caused by a ruptured cyst on her foot, excess accumulation of feces and other organic matter underneath the cages in violation of Wisconsin state law. And in June, when the state inspectors found these conditions, they gave Ridglan a chance to try and fix them. And in September 2024, just a month ago, they went back and we disclosed for the first time that we obtained this record from a state senator in the state of Wisconsin who found that even in this follow-up report, there continues to be dogs with injured cysts on their legs, inability to walk or stand because they're living their entire life on wire in atrocious and filthy conditions. So over and over again, in 2016, in 2017, in 2022, in 2023, and most recently in 2024, twice, government inspectors have known about the dangerous and unsanitary conditions at Ridglan Farms, and they've done nothing. It's important disclosure. So fourth takeaway. I testified openly about rescuing Julie and two other dogs from Ridglan Farms. And not only was it totally uneventful in court, no one accused me of a crime, no one thought it was shocking or radical that I went into Ridglan Farms to take the dogs out, but frankly, the entire courtroom was moved by the story. When people saw video of Julie spinning frantically, despite the fact that she had injured and inflamed feet that must have been causing her incredible pain, spinning like a little tornado in her cage for hours on end, and spinning even more frantically every time we walked away from the cage. The only sensible thing was to take her out. And I can't say for sure, but a number of people noted that even the courtroom staff, the bailiff, the judge, everyone in the courtroom was moved nearly to tears by seeing Julie in that state. And all of us felt that this dog needed to be removed. I also showed video footage of Julie just struggling to walk and stand with inflamed red paws, experiencing the world for the first time, trying to explore and understand the world, even though she was blind. And Ridglan didn't even know that they had a blind puppy inside one of their cages. And throughout the testimony, it became clear to me that the right to rescue, even though it had not been legally vindicated because our criminal charges were dismissed, we did not win a legal ruling in defense of the right to rescue, it still lived in that courtroom yesterday. And then finally, the final takeaway is that the judge is taking this case seriously and promised to issue a prompt decision after we file a final post-hearing, post-trial brief on November 8th. And really, that's all we can ask for. This judge has promised to be a serious judge, to be a thoughtful and deliberative judge, to apply the facts to the law and give an impartial decision. I think we met the burden of probable cause. In fact, we far exceeded the burden of probable cause, showing that animals have been abused at Ridglan by the thousands for many decades, with improper flooring causing foot injuries, metal cages, solitary confinement causing psychosis, and even surgical mutilations where dogs are having pieces of their bodies ripped off by non-veterinarians. And I hope the judge will make the right decision. In the meantime, all of you can help by just sending a note to Governor Tony Evers. If you go to simpleheart.org/Ridglan, you'll find instructions on how to do that. But the governor has an incredible power in Wisconsin, and we hope he'll make the right decision in this case by supporting the case and encouraging the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, which is under his supervision, to enforce the laws against Ridglan Farms and shut the place down, which could happen even without a prosecutor being appointed. But the next step for us is we're filing this brief on November 8th. The judge will make a decision on that brief, and if we prevail, a criminal complaint could be filed. Ridglan Farms could be charged, and 3,000 dogs could be freed from their cages for the first time in their lives. So anyways, that's the update. I'd love to hear if you have any other thoughts and questions, but just want to express so much support and love to all of you for everything you've done for these dogs, because we did this together. I'd probably be in a jail cell right now if not for the fact that so many people stepped up in this case. So thank you all so much. I'll see you next time. We don't have to hurt animals. You can protect them. We don't have to kill them. We can care for them. And that's who we're meant to be, right? That's who we are when we're at our best. We're caring for each other and for the other living beings of this earth and not hurting them.